Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day two of Target Elevate. We are seeing an amazing and enthusiastic group of women technologists come together on this platform for an immersive learning experience. I'm Anand Venkateshwaran, Vice President Finance at Target in India, and I will be your host for the breakfast session today. I grew up in a joint family with working parents. My mother worked for a public sector company for more than 35 years. In the 60s to the 80s, while most women would become housewives after marriage, my mother chose a path which was contrary to the norms. I admired her courage, self belief, focus, resilience, and multitasking ability. She had this unique quality in managing expectations of different members in the family and close friends. Much later in my life, I drew several leadership lessons from her. And more importantly, I realized how she broke away from stereotypes. The theme for the session this morning is on similar lines, dismissing stereotypes. Joining us this morning to talk to us is a girl who beat all odds. I'm delighted to have Radhika Gupta, Managing Director and CEO of Edelweiss Asset Management, here with us today. Over the next hour, Radhika will shed light on how she stopped caring about stereotypes and how she has been dismissing them every step of the way of her unconventional path to success. The choices Radhika made and how she found inspiration for the life she set out to live by just observing her mother. She has been labeled as the girl with a broken neck, but instead of crumbling, she chose to chart a new path and shine against the stereotypes of looks. From such circumstances to being a global citizen in the truest sense, having lived across three continents, Radhika has come a long way. She has this unique distinction of being the youngest woman CEO and MD of one of the largest and fastest growing asset management companies in India. Radhika understood early on that women are born with leadership skills and juggle many hats, and that too effortlessly. It's our privilege and delight to have Radhika with us on this session today. She will help you identify and pivot when faced with a roadblock or shrug off labels so you can chart your own path. Radhika, welcome once again to this forum, and the room is all yours.
Good morning, everybody. I assume I am visible and audible, but one should always do a check before one starts. And thank you, Anand, for the lovely introduction. And thank you to the entire Target team for having me at this wonderful event. Just as we were starting, by the way, I was watching, we can't do this event physically. And I saw clips of the previous event, and there looks like so much energy in the room. So I feel a little sad I'm not doing this physically, but between the awesome breakfast and everything that you guys have set up, especially Anand's fabulous background and the Target logo, I don't feel I'm missing anything out. I was also looking at some of the comments on the chat as some of the girls were talking, and that also added a ton of energy. So keep the comments on the chat coming. That's awesome. I'm going to keep hopefully most of this. I'm going to speak for a very little because I think there's so much energy that I really am enjoying the interactive session with Anand. But since this is a session about women in technology, I wanted to start with a small story. I actually did my undergrad degree in computer science from Penn, and at least at that time, I didn't have prior coding experience going into computer science, which was not so uncommon then. Like now, everybody codes when they're 5 years old, but back then it was not that common. But there were a fair amount of at least guys around me who had it. And so I remember going to introductory computer science class, and I think it was just after the tech boom had happened when I started. And there were about 300 kids in that class, and I think about 30 were women. I mean, some abysmal number. And I remember there was some assignment that we had or something that happened in class. And a guy came up to tell me, he came up and he told me and another girl, he said, "What are you guys doing here? You're girls, girls don't code." And I think that was just a reminder of all the stuff we're faced with. And I constantly kept asking myself, am I a misfit for computer science just because I didn't code till 12th grade or just because I happened to be a girl? The girl who was told that with me, her name is Maria Nazif. She ended up joining Google in 2003 and probably making a lot of money because she got Google stock. And I did reasonably okay for myself. But I think it's just an example of the stereotypes we face. I think for too long, women have been told you can't do this because you're a woman, you can't code because you're a girl. If you have leadership skills, then you're too aggressive and you're too bossy. But I think if you look at 2020 and the post COVID period, one of the most lasting memories of the post COVID period is the fact that if you look at all the countries that seem to handle COVID well, there was one thing incidentally common to all of them, and they had women leaders. So I think if women can handle countries and women can handle nations through one of the biggest crises that humanity has seen, it tells you a lot about what women can do. And I just want to give you today two or three examples. Everybody asks, who's your inspiration? I want to give you examples from the biggest inspiration that I think most of us see in our lives, about why I believe that women have all the skill sets for the future. So in November, my family lives in Delhi, and I went to Delhi and I stayed with my parents during the lockdown. And this is the first time I had spent extended time after them, because I left home at 17. And I got to stay with my mother and father. And my mother, father, brother, and his wife lived together. And my elderly grandmother was also staying with us then. My mother runs a school, she runs a large school in Delhi. And I would see her wake up literally at 6 in the morning. There was no help in the house because of the lockdown conditions in Delhi at that point in time. She would take care of four people's different variants of breakfast. At 7:30, she would start running a school digitally, and she would do this all the way from 7:30 to 4. And she would deal with, I mean, you think my job is tough? I mean, she was dealing with issues about kids muting teachers on classes and parents not paying fees. She would find a way to make, in the middle of all of this, the best lunch possible. My brother was going through a combination of issues. So, in the middle of the day, she would find time off from school to deal with my brother. And at night, and everybody in my house is very, very picky about what they eat, she would make three different kinds of dinner: one for my father, who refuses to eat carbs at night, one for my brother, who only wants Western food at night, and one for my nanny, who has a completely different diet because she doesn't have teeth to eat. And my mother did this for 1 month without any, getting upset. And we would all go to her and we would say, why are you doing this? Why itni jhanjat kyun le rahi ho? I mean, in Hindi, it means, why are you taking the trouble? And she said, this is not trouble. I enjoy this. And I think today, when you talk about leadership and taking care of each person individually, well, I think Indian mothers have been doing that for a very, very long time. I think if you talk about empathetic leadership, Indian mothers have been doing that beautifully for a very, very long time. The second thing that women seem to have in abundance is a lot of resourcefulness. I lived, as Anand said, across the world, and one of the countries I lived in was Nigeria. Now, I imagine most of you have not traveled to Nigeria, not a great place to travel to. But at that point in Nigeria, quite frankly, there wasn't much to do and there wasn't much to buy. So much so that you could not buy milk in Nigeria. You had to make do with milk powder. And it gets better. We were teenagers. You couldn't buy clothes. So you had to go to a cloth market called Yaba and actually buy your clothes there. So my mother, what she would do is she would go to this cloth market called Yaba. She would buy tons of cloth material, and then she would get a local tailor at home to sit and get all of this done. And incidentally, since she didn't have any hobbies to teach the kids, she sat and taught us bridge, which was the only thing she really knew how to do and how to keep kids occupied without taking them out. One day in our house in Nigeria, there was a robbery. And Nigeria is a very unsafe place, so nobody keeps cash at home. And it was found that $6,000 were actually stolen from the house in Nigeria. And when we investigated, we found out that this is the money that my father gave my mother to spend, which we call Gupt Dhan in UP, where I hail from. She actually kept in the house. India realized the quantum and the ability of Indian women to save in demonetization when much more than $6,000 of this money came out. And the point I'm making is that in the post COVID world, one of the most important things is the fundamental quality of resourcefulness, making do with what you can have and adapting to different circumstances. I think we are naturally born to do that. Incidentally, I come from the finance profession. I also think women are very, very good with managing money and household budgets, and we do it somehow without Excel spreadsheets and press releases and cost budgeting meetings and MIS and fancy CRM software. So we have a tremendous amount of resourcefulness. And finally, I think the world ahead of us is, and you are all in a consumer facing company, about delivering individualized experiences to customers. Hyper customization is the way of the world. Delivering each customer a very different kind of experience is the way of the world. And Indian women have done that straight on their dining table. I mean, every one of you will remember your mother cooking something very, very different to take care of every member of her house. And no mother asks, how much dal did you eat? She always asks, how was the dal? No matter how tired she is on the dining table, she'll ask every member of the family, how was the dal? So I think between the kind of leadership skills we have, the kind of resourcefulness that we were brought up with, and the ability to take care of everybody individually, I think we have all the skill sets it takes for the future. I want to end with a story that's very close to my heart from another country that I lived in. And it's a country called Italy. And I think most of you here would be familiar with the Sistine Chapel. So I lived in Rome, and the Sistine Chapel was what we took all visitors to see at all points in time. And the Sistine Chapel, of course, was painted by Michelangelo. But the backstory of the Sistine Chapel is that when the Pope asked Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel, he actually said no, because Michelangelo was a sculptor. He was not a painter. And he wanted his counterpart, Raphael, to do it. But the Pope basically insisted, and Michelangelo got stuck with the Sistine Chapel. And painting a ceiling is extremely tough, and he used a style called frescoes. His entire team apparently quit on him because it wasn't capable of doing this. And the process of painting was so intense because you couldn't even look down as you painted, and the plaster kept getting dried up. So Michelangelo actually developed a tremendous amount of neck pain, a little bit like me, as he did this exercise. But in doing what he did and in thinking big, Michelangelo left us with one of the finest architectural marvels that there has been on earth. And he left himself a legacy that we all remember. And if I have to leave you with three messages, it is one, think big. If Michelangelo had thought small, he would have painted the Sistine floor. He wouldn't have painted the ceilings of the chapel. So think big. Think about painting the ceiling. Don't think about painting the floor, no matter what anyone tells you. The second thing I would tell you is that in doing so, you will go through a share of hell. It's not a very nice thing to say, but you will go through crap, and you will go through hell, and you will go through days where you feel horrible, and you will go through days where your neck pains, and you will go through days where you feel guilty. It's okay. All of us do. Get through it. If the journey has to be great, it will be difficult. And if it's not difficult, I mean, there is no greatness in it. And thirdly, whatever you do, paint it uniquely. Paint it in your own style, with your own colors, with your own strokes, in your own way. So dream big, work really hard, and do it your own way. I really believe each of us is capable of building our own Sistine Chapel.
Uh, it's been super enlightening and super inspiring for us to just hear your journey and your story. Uh, I am going to start with some questions before I pass it on to the audience here. So Radhika, looking back at your own life, what was the moment when you knew your uniqueness was your biggest asset?
I took a long time to discover it, and I hope people don't take as long as I do. I was probably 32, 33. So, to be honest, because I grew up in so many different countries and sort of so many different circumstances, it was a very conflicted childhood. And I mean, people keep talking about how evil trolls are. I think teenagers are much more evil than trolls. So I grew up as a girl with all kinds of challenges and complexes about my looks and about the fact that, my father came from a government background when all of my classmates, even in Penn, were much richer than me. And so I grew up with all of that. And then I grew up with this tremendous complex about my neck. I mean, till 4 years ago, Anand, I hated seeing my own pictures because I was like, people are going to make fun of my neck. It happened in childhood. It even happens at airports. I mean, like the security women ask me about my neck. I don't know why anybody cares. It's not like everybody else is perfect looking, right? And then I did this session on storytelling where a mentor of mine told me that everything that you carry is not a weakness, it's a vulnerability. And if you think that everyone else lives lives that are Instagram and Facebook, that's not true. Everybody carries a vulnerability. And I did this talk, A Girl with a Broken Neck, a little bit after that. And I spoke about my story with a lot of honesty. And till date, it's been 2 years since that talk. I get messages from men and women every day, and each is sharing a story, of a bald patch on their head or a broken cheek or some challenge that they've been going through. And I realized, by the way, these people are not connecting to me because I'm CEO of Edelweiss Asset Management. I mean, half of them don't know what a mutual fund is. They're connecting to me because I'm a unique individual. And since then, I've learned that if you accept yourself as you are in all your uniqueness, you'll find a way to celebrate it. And I also believe that the world is a mirror. It sees you as you see yourself.
Fantastic. I love that. And this is something that even I can relate to what you said, because everybody has those uniqueness. I'm just thinking, as you thought about this, finding your uniqueness, and you said you struggled a lot before you eventually found how you can convert this, your uniqueness or something that you thought was a weakness in you to an opportunity. How did you really think about bringing this together from a personal brand standpoint? Would love to know, because it feels very easy, than being done. So how do you train yourself to do this?
So this is a great question. I'm glad you asked me. Now, look, I don't come from, so I keep getting this personal brand question and how does this happen, etc. I'm not a marketing expert. I am not a brand expert. And I actually probably learned what the word personal brand meant 2 years ago, well after I went on this journey. I think what the world needs is people who are authentic. And I think if you think about what a personal brand is, and I went to a class a year ago on this, it is just an authentic reflection of yourself. I also run a brand myself. And every brand, nobody likes a brand who's corporate. Everybody likes an individual, a company who's authentic. And I think when you embrace, and for a brand to be authentic, something has to stand out about the brand. The brand needs to feel at home, it needs to feel warm. And that's the same thing with an individual. So as you start sort of finding a place, and for me, I found that place, for me, uniqueness and sort of celebrating your own stories was that as you start bringing your authentic self to the table, personal brand will come out of it. It will reflect in your writing. So by the way, I like to write, and I've always liked to write as a kid, but obviously, I mean, it's not very common for a girl in tech or finance to write. What I was saying is I started writing on platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn, and it was all an expression of a bad day or honest thoughts at work. And in fact, people close to me know that a lot of the writing is inspired by something that happened at work. And last year, LinkedIn ranks me not only as one of the top 10 content creators in India, but one of the top 10 content creators in economy and finance in the world. And I'm the only Indian there besides Raghuram Rajan. And I'm thinking to myself, telling my husband, I was like, look, I am decent at what I do, but I'm not Raghuram Rajan. And he's like, it's okay. He writes from his lens and you write from your lens, but your lens is unique and you don't have what he has and he doesn't have what you have. So I know women also feel like imposters all the time. I had that imposter moment, but I was like, hey, maybe authenticity can take you this far.
That's fantastic, Radhika. And I think it's about how does each one of us discover what that uniqueness is. I write my own journals. I started this 2 years back, and I can tell you it's such a powerful way to just express yourself, especially those days when don't it doesn't really go according to the plan. So I completely agree with you. Uh, I want you to go back to something that you talked about, which just is something which I was able to relate through my own personal story with my mother. Is you speak about leadership as a skill every woman is born with, and I'm sure our participants would love to hear a little bit more around some of the leadership that you really talked about that every woman has in terms of leading nations to being empathetic to several other leadership characters that we men and the women can really feel inspired about. Can you talk a little bit more?
Yeah, and I think, look, I'm a relatively new leader, and I think leadership is discovered. I've probably been leading teams for the last 4 years, and I think COVID for me was also the first time I was leading teams through a situation of real crisis. But I think leadership is discovered. Now, one of the debates that I've had with my father, and my father represented the government in a very senior capacity, is that the old definition of leadership was the CEO who sat in a corner office and was distant from the nation or people around him or the team, etc., etc. And he would walk into the branch and never talk to anyone, and he was inaccessible, etc., etc. I don't think the new definition of leadership is like that. I think the new definition of a leader, and someone, by the way, the leader was the one who bore all the burden and never shared any problems with his troops. My definition of leadership, and I think the world's definition of leadership, is changing. I think leaders are vulnerable, leaders are authentic, and leaders are connected to their team. They are the bond that that holds their team together. They actually don't do anything, but if they're absent, you realize what they do. A little bit like a mother, actually. She's the bond that holds the family together. And there's so many great ads on this. On a day-to-day basis, you're like, what is she doing in the house? But one day she goes away and you're like, things fall apart. And I think that's what leadership is. It's being there, it's being vulnerable, it's being connected. So one of the things that I've learned in my leadership journey is that I am not going to be the good soldier and put everything is not my responsibility. Now, every time I have a problem, I have a circle of trust within my team, and I tell them the problem. And I'm like, guys, listen, I can't solve this. I'm struggling with this. And every time I do that, Anand, you will be surprised at how people take more initiative than I could ever ask them to take, and come up with more creative solutions than I could imagine. Because they know that, if you ask for help, people give it in hordes. That's my fundamental belief. Women are better even at asking for directions, by the way. I'm bashing you because you're a guy. But I think being there, keeping a sense of connections, asking for help when you need it, because you really do need help, and realizing that you're not all powerful just because your title is MD or CEO or department manager or head of XYZ, has been at least my discovery with leadership.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more, Radhika, to what you said. We all need help, no matter what our gender is, and it's okay to ask and reach out for that help. We're going to move to the audience questions, and we have a few questions that we have from our participants here. I'm going to request Alpa Bansal from Machani Group to come online and ask her first question.
Hi, morning. Am I audible?
Yes.
Fabulous. Radhika, you look gorgeous. So,
thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. My question is, all of us go through those especially tough days when you kind of turn for time, and time is just as much as we all have equally. Can you teach us or share a trick that you use to manage the tearing between home and work? Maybe something that works for you?
Sure. So I'm going to tell you two things, Alpa. Love your background, by the way. One is that, I go to a ton of these panels, and I get asked these questions about work-life balance, etc. So I have a friend, Amira Shah, she's the CEO of Metropolis, and she's like, why does everyone only ask these questions about work-life balance to a woman? I mean, why doesn't anyone ask a guy? Like, doesn't a guy have work and life and hobbies, and doesn't he have responsibilities? And it's not that women are the only ones who have to balance work and life, but I think
Correct.
time you ask a question to a girl about work-life balance, you remind her and make her feel guilty. So my trick to this is throw that word work-life balance out of the window. It's an obsolete word. It was meant for a time when work meant going to a factory and working 9 to 5, and work was horrible. And after work ended, life began. Okay, like life was cool and work was evil. Hopefully, most of us do things that we enjoy and love. Second, balance gives you this impression that you're sitting on the seesaw and you're constantly trying to juggle and forget work and life. The balance is the one creating all the stress in your head, that am I balanced or am I change it to work life harmony. My life rule is work life harmony. And harmony means that sometimes work takes precedence over life and it occupies 95% of your time because you're working on some project, etc. And tell people and ask them to pick up the slack. And sometimes life takes up a lot of your time and you tell people at work, I can't. So I've had a phase when we were launching Bharat Bond where I don't think I spoke to my husband and parents for 3 weeks, and they absolutely understood. And I had a phase when I was in Delhi in the lockdown where I really valued that time I had with my parents. And Diwali is a big deal in our house. And one of my bosses asked us to do a meeting with a member of the Edelweiss board who's very senior on the night of Choti Diwali. And I said, I'm not doing this because it's not a critical meeting. So, there are times you will carve out for home and there are times you will carve out for work, and there may be times you'll carve out for another hobby like speaking or writing or whatever it is, but do it in the moment and completely. Don't try to be balanced at all points in time, and realize there will be days when you fall apart. It's okay, all of us do.
Thanks, Alpa, for asking that question. Our next participant, Pallavi Kalisetti from Legato Health, has a question. Pallavi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Anand. Thank you, Radhika, so much. What a wonderful session in the morning. So, it's a lot of motivation from you, Target and Radhika. I really thankful for that. So, my question is, how can we intrinsically motivated when we are working in the workspaces, especially? So sometimes when we try to implement some process changes, we feel little demotivation from the leadership team or anyone in the teams. So in that case, how can we manage? How can we get intrinsic motivation?
Thanks, Pallavi. I think good question. I think motivation has to come from within. There can be lots of speakers and there can be things that your bosses tell you and don't tell you, but I think motivation ultimately comes from within you. I think there is an inner Michelangelo and anybody who says, I have some purpose and I want to leave some sense of legacy. So I think motivation comes from within you. For me, that is how it's always been. I think someone said this earlier in the session. It's about trying not to beat anyone else, but to become the best version of yourself every day. My father always said, he came from a government school and he actually studied in Hindi medium till 12th. But then he ranked 7th in civil services, all India. And one of the things when I was growing up that he taught me, he's like, each generation should make a leap. So he kept telling me, he's like, I joined the foreign service a couple of years late because I couldn't even afford the tuition fees for a coaching school. He's like, you have to take all the opportunities that are given to you, Radhika. And he said, look, I am not an industrialist. I am not the CEO of some company, but I've given you a certain set of opportunities. They may be less than someone, they may be more than someone. But in your given context, you have to make the best of the opportunities that are offered to you. He also said that in the context of countries. He's like, I can't change the fact that I'm posted to Nigeria. It's my career. But within the fact that I live in Nigeria, you have to make the best of what is offered to you here. And that's something that at least I grew up with very, very strongly, is that you have to make the best of what is given to you. It may be more than someone, it may be less than someone. The other thing I'm going to say, since you mentioned bosses, is sometimes, and I used to suck at this, we struggle to have difficult conversations with our bosses. We feel that people will figure out if we are demotivated and they will solve our problems as if they are there to read our mind. It doesn't happen that way. I would ask all of you, please speak up and please ask for opportunities. I've had, like many of us, challenges with bosses, challenges with counterparts, but there is nothing. At some point in life, I realized this problem is me. The problem is that I'm not saying I have a problem. I'm feeling demotivated. Can you help me? Please speak up and ask for help. There is no shame in doing it.
Thank you. Our next participant, Pratibha Patlu from Anthem Inc., has the question. Pratibha, over to you.
Thanks, Anand. Hi, Radhika. Good morning. I'm having a wonderful session. Thank you for that. Thank you for the wonderful stories that you're sharing. My question to you is, Radhika, I know you're a fast CEO. I want to know, I'm very curious to know, how did you deal with speed on your career being on a high speed trajectory? I'm curious to know about it.
Yeah, interesting question. I have been fortunate in that perhaps I am a little younger than the counterparts, typical CEO counterparts in my age. I think two things that have been important to me. One is when I have tried to build my career, and I think this is advice that perhaps can be valuable for anyone. I've tried to make sure when we grow up, we always focus on getting a good education and good brands and all of that. I've tried to focus on the quality of work experience I've gotten rather than the label attached to it. Because I really think it is about collecting experiences of high quality rather than degrees. And I'll give you an example. I worked at a large US based hedge fund. After that, I did 5 years at a startup, running my own startup. I worked in Edelweiss, which is a large Indian corporate, but within the Edelweiss context, I've handled two mergers. I've done projects with the government of India. So each of these projects in some ways has enriched me. So, sometimes people keep saying, oh, you don't have 25 years of experience, etc. I have 15 years of work experience. But my retort to that is each of those 15 years of work experience is very, very rich. It's not about number of years of experience, it's about quality of experience. So I have constantly tried to push myself in terms of the quality of experience I get and the diversity of experience. I've been a money management professional all my life, but within money management, I've done startup, I've done big farm, I've done global, I've done India, I've done government, and that's what I keep trying to do. Every year I keep trying to ask. So I do an annual self review that my bosses don't do with myself every year, saying what skill sets am I weak on and what do I need to get better and better at. So when I started in the money management business, I come from an investment background, so that was core to me, but I knew nothing about sales and marketing. So I said, okay, for the next 1.5 years, I'm going to spend a lot of time on sales and marketing. Right now, my quest is to spend a lot of time on the operations and technology side of the business. So that's one thing that I keep trying to do. The second thing is, and this relates to self-assessment, I feel organizations give us far more opportunities than people take. I see this in our own team. Organizations give you exposure to things like this. They give you tremendous amount of training. They give you lots of group projects. And every time I've been offered one of those, I have jumped to take it. So I think 4 years ago before I had become CEO, my boss had asked me to do a merger of two companies, Edelweiss and JP Morgan. And he asked me to do it because I had no leadership experience before that. I had only managed 5-7 people. And a lot of people told me, "Kyun kar rahi hai yaar?" Because it was a very painful merger. And I was effectively like a head of HR, answering conversations and doing org structure. I mean, I did 100 one-on-one conversations. And they were like, "You have an existing business. Why are you doing this?" I felt it would do something for me. I felt it would add a skill set to my resume. And I really think organizations give us a lot more than we take advantage for. So every opportunity that you're offered, jump at it and try to make the best of it because they all fit together.
Wow, that was great. Quality with diversity. What a takeaway. Thank you, Radhika.
Couldn't have been a better way to close this. We need to call it a wrap, but this was wonderful and an awe-inspiring session that I'm left with many takeaways. So thank you, Radhika, for this. Celebrating one's uniqueness, believing in oneself, asking for help, investing in our own skill sets, and more importantly, looking around for inspiration. I think there are many, many other takeaways from this session. Thank you, Radhika, for joining us today, and to all our participants for being part of this incredible story sharing session today. Thank you.